Hello, I'm Sondra Rapoport, Roman historian. Thank you for joining me again this week to continue our discussion on sex in the ancient world. This time we're going to be looking at professional and institutionalized sex, from prostitution to harems. This is definitely going to be an interesting discussion. Part of the reason that I have chosen the order of the subjects that we have discussed so far is that I want you to have an understanding of the ancient world and how it functions, how people think, how they feel, and what they value in their everyday lives. And what's also interesting is to see also how then the ancient world then influences the modern world, like with coins or with public art through statuary. And now we're looking at a more personal view of the ancient world, by looking at sex and the sexual imagery, the sexual acts, the sexual ideals, and what was and was not acceptable within the society in terms of sexuality. You can really get to know people really well. There's nothing more intimate than sex. So what I want to also do is educate you more fully for how the ancient world is, so you can have a really good idea of it. But at the same time, I also want to, talk about seriously what you guys all want to talk about. You all want to talk about sex. You all want to hear the details about it. So that's what we're going to do. But also at the same time, I showed you in the first discussion about ancient sex a lot of erotic and imagery, because also I wanted to sensitize you a little bit, to give you a little bit of a taste of what it was that you really wanted to see anyway. But also I wanted to have you completely and totally understand what the ancients thought was acceptable and unacceptable during their lifetimes, and then we can now compare it to ourselves in our time period. So let's begin our discussion. Let's go back to Pompeii again. Here is the beautiful forum with the beautiful statues. It's a lovely city, and it's locked in time. There's so many elements of it that are perfectly preserved. Here you see the remains of a home. If you remember, when the volcano came through, a lot of the second floors of buildings were destroyed. A lot of roofs were destroyed. So you have to use a lot of your imagination. But here you can see the little pool in the entryway of the home called the impluvium. You can see the basic layout of the home. Here's another, just looking into your basic home, villa in Pompeii. You can see a little bit of paintings on the walls as you enter in. And then here is some highly typical art, wall art that you would see inside a Pompeian villa. Highly intricate, beautiful. Here is beautiful art from the Villa of Mysteries. Highly artistic, colorful, imaginative, draws in the viewer to such an extent. This is the type of art we're used to seeing in Pompeii. But don't forget from our first lecture that Pompeii is also a place that is very comfortable with erotic imagery. The whole entire Roman world is very comfortable with erotic imagery. It's not seen as shocking. It's not seen as obscene or pornographic. It's part of everyday life. And so, yes, you would have typical scenes of your wind chime, the tintabulum, the flying phallus with the bells, or this cute little guy here with his giant phallus. He's a lamp. You would use him to light your way at night, or even hang him up in the corner or something of the room to light your way. And then let's not forget also, one of our favorite guys here, Priapus, weighing his giant phallus on a scale. He's a very typical image, and he's not an image from a brothel. He's not an image from a bathhouse. He's from within a villa. And, so this does bring us, however, to a house of prostitution. This is one of the most famous ones in Pompeii, the Luminaria. And it is, in just about 2 blocks from the Forum, very centrally located. But this is an example of one. This is the largest one. I think it has about 10 rooms. It's got multiple floors. You can see it's been a little bit reconstructed. But inside there are some of the images and such that we're well familiar with. And this brings us into a little bit of the discussion of Pompeii and prostitution. There was various levels of it. There was the street prostitute, the brothel prostitute, and then there was also higher levels of prostitution. This particular building has the type of little tiny chambers with the stone beds. You see these in a couple other places in Pompeii too, but you see these stone beds in place where you would put down a thin mattress and bedding and such. But this is an indication of a house of prostitution. It's not just erotic imagery, because that could be in bathhouses or in somebody's bedroom or dining room, or it could be in many different areas, erotic imagery. Erotic imagery is not just the only thing that indicates a house of prostitution, a brothel. But also these stone beds are also an indication of a brothel being in the neighborhood or being in this particular location. So one of the questions I had, one of the very first times that I visited Pompeii as a student, was why is it that these stone beds are an indication of prostitution? Why is that something that we should look at and we should automatically, when we see this, yes, this must be a brothel, this must be a place of prostitution. Why? How does this differ? Well, let's look at Roman homes. Let's look at how they lived in their everyday lives. We don't see these stone beds at home. We see bedrooms. And also remember that Pompeii is so unique in that it is a time capsule. And that when Vesuvius went off and exploded in 79 AD, it not only seared the entire city in this rush of incredible heat and gas, but also dropped a ton of ash and pyroclastic flow and all of that sort of stuff on top of the city. And so what that did was give it a feel, and also it locked it all in place. And now we get a feel for how life was in the ancient world, for how people functioned in the ancient world, and how they viewed sexuality. And so again, that takes me back to the stone beds. If you look in the bedrooms of Pompeian homes, you don't see this just stone beds. You see them in places of brothels, places where you're going to perhaps have turnover. The types of places where you're going to have, like in and out types of customers. The girl might not even have the room for the full entire day. So you have the stone bed, and you can put thin mattresses on top of it. You can put blankets, types of materials and stuff that you can change out and wash out quickly. So and also throughout literature too, we know that the stone beds are an indication of prostitution. So that's the answer to one of my first questions I had when I was first in Pompeii, when I was confronted with the idea of brothels and prostitution, was why are stone beds an indication? Well, now you know. It's because, if at home you would have a nice warm wooden bed, but in the brothels you want to move things out more quickly, so you have the stone bed. It's interesting and almost modern in some ways. A question I am asked frequently is, was Pompeii a hotbed of prostitution? Were there brothels everywhere? Was it like the red light district in Amsterdam today? And my answer is most likely not. Pompeii was a very small seaside community. Yes, it was a wealthy community. Yes, there was filled with, it was right on the Bay of Naples. There were lots of villas, lots of marketplaces. It was obviously a bustling city. But remember also, it was very, very small. It's not New York. It's not Rome. It's population about 6,000. Small. Even we would probably call it a harem. I've heard, on the so-called History Channel, which please promise me every single time you watch a show on that channel, please take it with a giant, huge pile of salt. It is no longer an indication of history. I don't even know what's going on there, but I occasionally I watch it for humor. And so recently I saw in a documentary where they're talking about Pompeii was a hotbed of prostitution. There were 134 brothels. Oh my gosh. Like, how are they going to support that level of prostitution in a town that small? And yes, people are coming in and out. Yes, it's an international town, but like, seriously. So I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about erotic imagery. So I want to, if you have more questions about erotic imagery and how it works, my first lecture is about sex in the ancient world, erotic imagery. But just to recap a little bit, it's something that they're very, very comfortable with. It's something that, that isn't unusual for them. It's not something to be frightened of or to even think is outlandish, to have pictures of sexual activity or phalluses or phallusi or nudity in your home. This was not unusual whatsoever. So it was Pompeii, a hotbed of sexual activity. Well, it was a vacation town. So yeah, there's going to be some, we know there were definitely brothels. Yes, there's some sexual activity, but there would definitely be a lot more brothels and sexual activity within a great city like Rome. You remember our friend here. He is not something to be considered obscene or to be frightened or even shocked when you see him. If you remember from the first lecture, this is a normal image, an image that might be in a home. Here's one that might be in a brothel, perhaps, or in a bathhouse. And the next image as well. And it could be an assortment of different places: home, brothel, bathhouse, bar, these sort of places. But it's not is something that's shocking. This is an everyday image in the ancient world. You know me, I like to make everything about Augustus. So how could prostitution in the ancient world be somehow Augustan, be somehow part of Augustan propaganda or the Augustan, regime, or part of his plan? Well, it's not specifically a part of his plan. However, during his regime, he passed a lot of morality laws. A lot of laws engaged in trying to strengthen his civilization and to strengthen the basic Roman family values type laws. And so amongst these were laws in which you were punished for being a single man. Childless couples were totally, I think, fined. And then also adultery was punished. It was punished. It is totally not worth it to go after a married woman at all. And so prostitution was seen as an acceptable alternative for men to do their thing without breaking the laws of adultery. Because it's very interesting in Roman society, the role that women play. So a wife and a mother, a Roman matron, she is not a highly sexualized figure. Yes, she has the children. Yes, she has the heirs to the family. Yes, she is the wife. But she's more of a hostess and a mother type of situation than a highly sexual figure. It's not often that you find stories of a man being extraordinarily overly attracted to his wife. This is a different sort of love and respect type of relationship. And so for Augustus, inadvertently, while passing his morality laws, actually highly encouraged prostitution, because by making adultery illegal, by making it so disadvantageous to go after a married woman, he actually helped the institution of prostitution become more profitable, become more acceptable, become almost necessary in his society. Come with me to ancient Athens, where they have different levels of prostitution there. We see the types of imagery that we're used to seeing in Pompeii, the types of overt sexual acts. Sometimes this one is crazy acrobatic. I think it's actually called a hetairai with two male barbarians. A hetairai is a subject for scholarly debate, this term. Some scholars think its term applies to all prostitutes in general, and some feel that it applies to a certain level of prostitute, a high level of concubine, that a man would enter into a long-term relationship for both sexual and intellectual stimulation, like a geisha type relationship. So you see in ancient Greece, regardless of the meaning of the term and where you fall in that discussion, you do see different levels of prostitution, from the type of prostitute you would see in a type of brothel or even on the street, to a type of high level, beautiful prostitute, the hetairai, the concubine, the one that was socially acceptable for the man to go out and about with in the evenings. Because if you remember that in Greek society, the wife's job was to be a mother, was to be a hostess, was to be, above all, beyond reproach, mother to the heirs of the future family line. And so she lived a secluded lifestyle. She was secluded at home most of the time, much like the women of the harem we'll be speaking of later. Now we're going to move on to the discussion of harems, the concept of harems. It is an interesting concept that actually goes through a lot of ancient societies, throughout many different cultures. And so we're going to be looking at just one or two of them, actually. But the thing about the harem is that the first thing you need to understand is that it has one primary function. The primary function is to produce legitimate heirs. And this is in order to avoid the problem that Henry VIII had of England, where he went through 6 wives and ended up with 2 daughters and 1 sickly son who died at 15. With a harem, you don't end up with that. You end up usually with entirely too many sons, which can present different problems. We can go into that at another time. So the thing with the harem is that female seclusion is the main element of the harem. This is a practice it's not only common to the more traditionally known Ottoman Empire style harems, but it was also practiced in ancient Greece as well. I just explained about the wives and their situation. They were also kept in a secluded type of environment. And this is essentially to ensure the legitimacy of the line. And because wives and women of the harem had one primary job, and that was to produce heirs. Now, what's interesting about the harem is that also there are political elements as well. These women also develop political roles. They develop political influence. And so we'll discuss that just a little bit. Egypt, in the ancient world, that magical, interesting, mysterious place. But there are many things about it that are quite familiar to what we've been discussing this whole entire time. Even though, as I discussed in a previous lecture, there is not a lot of erotic or sexual imagery in ancient Egypt. It was a land that did have concubines, prostitutes, and was also highly sexual as well, just as any civilization and culture would be. And the pharaoh would have access not only to his wife for official heirs, but also to official concubines and in small harem type of groups. Some pharaohs had 1, 2 concubines. Some of them had several. They also always had a wife, sister wife, and if that produced a legitimate son, if that produced a healthy boy, then wonderful. But if not, then the concubine could also produce an heir, which happened in the case of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was married to her brother, but they did not have a child together. They did not have a son, excuse me. They had a daughter together, but they did not have a son. He actually had a son with his concubine, who I believe his name is Isis, and that was Thutmose IV. And so that was her stepson. And so then his mother, this concubine, began to have political influence. Of course, she's the mother of the next king, the future king, so forth. This is not uncommon in harems. You hear sometimes about the rulership of women via harem, because these women had intimate, private time with the ruler. They had time with his ear. They could speak to him about things that was important to them, important issues, but also to put forth their son. Because in a harem, with an assortment of different sons and so forth, depending on the civilization and culture, just because you're the oldest doesn't mean you're next. So you can influence who's going to be the next one, so on and so forth. And this is not uncommon for women to use their position in order to gain the ear. And you see this in harems. You see this in Greece with the Hittite, and you see this throughout ancient Rome as well. When women try an assortment of different ways to gain political and influence, and this particular position is an excellent way for them to do so. So there we have it, the next installment in our exploration through sex in the ancient world. So we've looked at erotic imagery, we've looked at all of the different aspects of it so far. And now we've gone through professional sex and institutionalized sex, looking at prostitutes, Hittite, looking at the situation in Pompeii, and all the way through harems that even affected the rule of Hatshepsut, our favorite Egyptian pharaoh. So thank you for joining me. Next week, we're going to continue this discussion, and this is going to be particularly interesting because it's a subject that is in great discussion right now in the modern world, but in the ancient world, they would be confused as to why we were having such a large discussion about this issue. So we're going to be discussing homosexuality and kind of the LGBT type situation in the ancient world, which they would not label as such. It is completely different to them and a completely different concept. We're going to discuss it. It's going to be fascinating for me, for you, for everybody around. And so I am really looking forward to next week. And I am very, very happy that you joined me tonight. And I hope, once again, that you have a very, very lovely evening.